This is The Legend of Tucker Caliban, which is an article, a book review by Father Thomas Merton. The book was A Different Drummer by an African-American author. And yeah, in a day where we have discussions about interracial marriage and things going on with our immigration policy, just everything else, all the issues that are anti-life and tied together. There's a war in ourselves that's unresolved, and so it seeps to the outside world. But this and much of Thomas Merton's other writings seem to me to be especially relevant. And one note, I think I've done a reading of Thomas Merton's before, and just knowing that this is, just go in knowing that he was writing these things in the 60s, and a different language was acceptable as far as our terms for other peoples. Yeah. The deep elemental stirrings that lead to social change begin within the hearts of men whose thoughts have hitherto not been articulate, or who have never gained a hearing, and whose needs are therefore ignored, suppressed, and treated as if they did not exist. There is no revolution without a voice. The passion of the oppressed must first of all make itself heard, at least among themselves, in spite of the insistence of the privileged oppressor that such needs cannot be real or just or urgent. The more they cry of the oppressed, the more the cry of the oppressed is ignored, the more it strengthens itself with the mysterious power that is to be gained from myth, symbol, and prophecy. There is no revolution without poets who are also seers. There is no revolution without prophetic songs. The voice of the American Negro began to be heard long ago, even in the days of his enslavement. He sang of the great mysteries of the Old Testament, the Magnalia Dei, which are at the heart of the Christian liturgy. In a perfect, unconscious, and spontaneous spirit of prayer and prophecy, the Negro spirituals of the last century remain as classic examples of what a living liturgical hymnody ought to be, and how it comes into being. Not in the study of the research worker or in the monastery library, still less in the halls of curial offices, but where men suffer oppression, where they are deprived of identity, where their lives are robbed of meaning, and where the desire of freedom and the imperative demand of truth forces them to give it meaning, a religious meaning. Such religion is not the opium of the people, but a prophetic fire of love and courage, fanned by the breathing of the Spirit of God, who speaks to the heart of his children in order to lead them out of bondage. Hence the numinous force of the great and primitive art of the American Negro, a force which makes itself felt precisely where men have lost the habit of looking for art. For instance, in the potent and mysterious jazz, which has kept alive the inspiration of the traditional blues, the contemporary voice of the American Negro. And also in the freedom songs, which he now sings, in the Baptist churches of the South, where he prepares to march out and face the police of states already frankly fascist and racist, which arm themselves against him with clubs, fire hoses, police dogs, and electric cattle prods, throwing their jails wide open to receive him. His song continues to resound in prison, like the songs of Paul and his companions in the Acts of the Apostles. The Negro novelist and essayist has an important part in this creative expression of the present sense of kairos, which is behind the great drive for freedom now. We remember, of course, Richard Wright, whose warm voice is now silent, but who speaks still in his followers. We think especially of James Baldwin, who ranks with Martin Luther King as one of the most influential of Negro spokesmen today. Go Tell It on the Mountain is at once Baldwin's first novel and his best, as well as the one which has the most to say about the motives and the spirit of the Black Revolution in America. His hard-hitting tract, The Fire Next Time, which borrows its title from one of the Negro spirituals and which has an eschatological reference, is a manifesto of the Negro freedom movement which has done more than anything else to shock white readers into recognizing the seriousness and the unfamiliarity of the situation which they have been more or less taking for granted. The title of the first novel of William Melvin Kelley, A Different Drummer, is taken significantly from Henry Thoreau. Thoreau, the hermit and the prophet of nonviolence, preached civil disobedience in protest against unjust laws a century ago, before the Civil War. He was an early champion of Negro freedom as well as a notorious nonconformist who seems to have believed that the American Revolution had either misfired or had never really taken place. Thoreau said, "If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away." It is an admirable title for the most mythical and in some sense the most prophetic of the Negro novels, one which makes quite clear the fact that the Negro hears a drummer with a totally different beat, and one which the white man is not yet capable of understanding. Yet it is imperative for him to pay attention. The trite and nasal hillbilly fiddling to which the white American mind continues its optimistic jig has long ago ceased to have a meaning, and the most advanced country in the world runs the risk of being, in certain crucial matters, precisely the most retarded. Certainly there is great risk for a nation which is still playing cowboys and Indians in its own imagination, but with H-bombs and Polaris submarines at its disposal. A Different Drummer is more than a brilliant first novel by a young Negro writer. It is a parable which spells out some of the deep spiritual implications of the Negro battle for full civic rights in the United States and for a completely human status in the world today. This is more than a story of Negro protest. It is a myth endowed with extraordinary creative power, bringing to light the providential significance of a tragedy in which, whether we know it or not, understand it or not, like it or not, we are all playing a part. Since we are all in the struggle, we might as well try to find out what it really means. The works of Negro writers are there to tell us. Such books cannot be ignored. They must be read with deep attention. They spell out a message of vital importance, which is not to be found anywhere else at the present moment, and on the acceptance of which the survival of American freedom may depend. The book opens as the loafers on the porch of a general store in a small town of the Deep South watch a truckload of rock salt pass through on its way to the farm of a Negro called Tucker Caliban. I guess 60 years later, spoiler alert for this book. It ends as the same loafers, after watching all the Negroes, mysteriously and without explanation, clear out of the state, lynch the last Negro available to them, a potentate from the North, a founder of a black racist movement. The heart of the story is the sense of kairos, the realization that the Negro's hour of destiny has struck. No one can deny that this is one of the most striking and mysterious characteristics of the Negro freedom movement. It is this sense which, awakening everywhere in the Negro masses of the South, especially in the youth, has brought them by the hundreds and thousands out of the ghettos in which they have vegetated for a century of frustrated and despairing expectation. It is this that has moved them to action, not so much because a few inspired leaders like Martin Luther King have called them to action, but because the entire Negro race and all the vast majority of colored races all over the world have suddenly and spontaneously become conscious of their real power and it seems, of a destiny that is all their own. Hence, inseparable from the sense of... But in the same way, all peoples can become aware of a power that is their own. And, it's what we do with it. Do we act it out in subjugation of other peoples and their power, or do we act in cooperation with other peoples and their uniqueness? Just a thought. Hence, inseparable from the sense of kairos is a conviction of vocation, of a providential role to play in the world of our time. With the awakening of independence in Africa, the American Negro has become acutely conscious of his own underprivileged status and of his yearning not only to become a part of white society, for this is now evidently a doubtful benefit in his eyes, but to play his own creative role in human history. One finds everywhere in American Negro society a more or less explicit anticipation of the end of the white domination of the world and the decline of European American civilization. The Negro, therefore, cannot be content merely to be integrated into something he regards as already over and done with. And this is what the myth in Kelley's novel is all about. Tucker Caliban is the central figure in the myth. He is the new Negro, the completely new Negro, not the Negro organizer from the North, not the Negro who has been to college, but a kind of preternatural figure, the lineal descendant of a giant African chief who came over with his tribe in a slave ship to be bought and killed by the first governor of the mythical southern state in which the story takes place. The giant African is the symbol of the Negro race and of its innate spirit, which the white man has tried first to tame for his own purposes, then to destroy. Tucker Caliban is not giant. He is a small, intense, taciturn Negro, aligned with no group, no movement, and no cause. The implication is that he sees completely through even the best of movements and of causes. He also understands the problems of white people. He views them completely objectively and without bitterness. He harbors no delusions about them, and he places no hope whatever in the official benevolence of the white man. His is the spirit in which the Negro freedom movement must develop. In him, the wisdom and strength of the African ancestor must one day awaken. Meanwhile, the Calibans have served the family of the governor for over a century, both as slaves and as freedmen. Tucker's father is the typical of the venerable Negro servant, loyal and entirely devoted to his master. In other words, he is what the Negroes now regard with deepest scorn. He is an Uncle Tom, or one who has fully accepted an inferior position in white society. Tucker, without hatred and without rebellion, driven by an inner force which he does not quite understand himself, and which baffles everybody who comes in contact with him, first buys a piece of land from the family his family has served so long. Then he leaves their service and farms his newly acquired land for about a year. Finally, following inscrutable interior messages, he sterilizes his field with rock salt, shoots his mule and his cow, sets fire to his house, and leaves in the night with his pregnant wife. He simply vanishes. At this, all the Negroes in the state begin to leave. It is not necessary to know where they go. They just go. Out of the state, out of the South. In a few days they are all gone, leaving empty houses which they have not bothered to sell, with the doors wide open, furniture inside. Their departure is a symbolic statement. It is the final refusal to accept paternalism, tutelage, and all different forms of moral, economic, psychological, and social servitude wished on them by the whites. In the last analysis, it is the final rejection of the view of life implied by white culture. It is a definitive no to white America. The book is about the bewilderment with which this is observed and dimly understood by all the people who see them go. The poor whites, the child of a white sharecropper, the descendants of the first governor, Southerners educated in the North, and finally the Reverend Bennett Bradshaw, founder of the Black Jesuits, a Northern Negro leader who is just as mystified as everyone else by the things that are happening. Though he, more than anyone, would have wanted to set all these things in motion. He has never been consulted or even dreamed of. He is not wanted any more than the benevolent white liberal is wanted, because he has no real power to do anything, to start anything, to move anyone. Yet for the Southern whites, there has to be some explanation that fits their picture of life and reassures them that things are what the South has always believed them to be. In a final tragic irony, the loafers at the store follow the irresponsible inspiration of one of their number and blame the black Jesuit for engineering the hegira. After beating him up, they drive him in his own Cadillac to Tucker Caliban's gutted farm, and his screams in the southern night ring down the curtain on this strange morality play about the evil of our time. Evil is the word. Those who have seen at first hand the eerie glow in the eyes of the racist, those who have heard their peculiar silences as they stand together in the shadows waiting for the forces within them to reach some mysterious point where inner confusion and self-hate turn into violent fury. Those who have seen this are aware of what it means to see apparently good and harmless men possessed with an evil so total and so complete that they prefer not to understand it, or refer to it, or treat it as if it existed. Yet this evil is not something purely and simply confined to white trash in the South. What is open and expressed in the South may perhaps be hidden and implicit everywhere in the nation that is so fascinated with violence and with the myth of power that it seems to have lost interest in anything else, with the possible exception of sex. There is no need to intone a litany of cliches in a useless attempt to convey some idea of the power with which this story is told. It is a power without the bitterness and frustration that gives such bite to the works of James Baldwin. Kelley, a northern Negro like Baldwin, is much more tranquil and reflective. The force of the myth itself seems to have absorbed and tamed the bitter rage that might have gone into such a story. There is no rage. Resentment is sublimated into irony. This accounts for the book's unforgettable impact. The myth of Tucker Caliban tells the same kind of truth as dreams tell us in our moments of personal crisis, spelling out to us in symbols ranging from ideal to hallucination and to nightmare, the truths that are struggling for acceptance and for expression in our hearts. That is the particular value of such a book. It gives us a message which, like all prophetic messages, is mostly in code so that we can both hear and not hear. We can accept just as much of it as we are able. But if we really want to, we can understand completely. What then is the message? The message of this book is very much the same as that which we read in James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, written and published after A Different Drummer. It is the same message which the best American Negro writers are now, with a rather astonishing unanimity and confidence, announcing to the white world as their diagnosis of that world's sickness, with their suggestions for escaping the death which is otherwise inevitable. First of all, we must seriously face the magnanimity of the statement. It would be all too easy for the Negroes simply to write the whites off as a total loss, as indeed the black Muslims are doing, and be done with them forever. This solution is appealing not only in its simplicity, but also in its correspondence with the deepest psychological need of the Negro, the need to recover his belief in his own autonomous reality, the need to get the white man, spiritually and psychologically, off his back. But in point of fact, such a solution is not really possible, as the best Negro writers see quite clearly. They have certainly rejected, with all their force, the gross and subtle forms of alienation imposed on them by white society, even where it claims to do most to make them free. But the thing that so many readers have failed to see in these books is the rather convincing assurance that there is one kairos for everybody. The time that has providentially come for the black man is also providential for the white man. This implies a profoundly Christian understanding of man's freedom in history, a point that must be underscored. The Negro Revolution is a real revolution, and it is definitely not Marxian. It may have some very violent and destructive potentialities in it, but they have nothing to do with Soviet communism. To identify the Negro movement as a red-inspired revolt against Western democracy is a totally ludicrous evasion, and one which involves complete and incurable ignorance of what is actually happening. This is, of course, precisely why it is accepted with total satisfaction by the entire South. In Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, it is an article of faith that all this trouble with the Negroes has been fomented by communist agents. Though writers like Baldwin and doubtless Kelley lay no claim to be Christians, their view is still deeply Christian and implies a substantially Christian faith in the spiritual dynamism with which man freely creates his own history, not as an autonomous and titanic self-affirmation, but in obedience to the mystery of love and freedom at work under the surface of human events. In the light of this, then, the hour of freedom is seen also as an hour of salvation. But it is not an hour of salvation for the Negro only. The white man, if he can possibly open the ears of his heart and listen intently enough to hear what the Negro is now hearing, can recognize that he is himself called to freedom and to salvation in the same kairos of events which he is now, in so many different ways, opposing or resisting. These books tell us that it is the Negro who hears or believes he hears the true voice of God in history and interprets it rightly. The white man has lost his power to hear any inner voice other than that of his own demon, who urges him to preserve the status quo at any price, however desperate, however iniquitous, and however cruel. The white man's readiness to destroy the world rather than change it is dictated by this inner demon, which he cannot recognize, but which the Negro clearly identifies. The tragedy of the present crisis in race relations, say the Negro writers, is therefore essentially the white man's tragedy, and he will destroy himself unless he can understand and undergo the metanoia that will bring him into harmony with the awakened forces that are being revealed to him in the struggle of his black brother. The Negro may have much to suffer, and the times ahead may yet prove most terrible. But essentially, for him, the days of tragedy are over. He has awakened and taken his destiny into his own hands. Tucker Caliban, when he burned his house down and took off into the night, was not a tragic hero. On the contrary, the implication of tragedy is all affixed to the comfortable and secure life which his father led as a loyal servant of the white governor's family. Tragedy is not in freedom, but in moral servitude. We are no longer in the world of Aeschylus and Sophocles, in which the aspiration to freedom is linked with unbearable guilt and punished by the gods. We are in a Christian world in which man is redeemed, liberated from guilt by the inner truth that makes him free to obey the Lord of history. It is the Lord of history who demands of the Negro a complete break with his past servitudes. And the break must be made by the Negro himself, without any need of the white man's paternalistic approval. It is absolutely necessary for the Negro to dissolve all bonds that hold him, like a navel cord, in passive dependence on the good pleasure of the white man's society. The real tragedy is that of the white man who does not realize that though he seems to himself to be free, he is actually the victim of the same servitudes which he has imposed on the Negro, passive subjection to the lotus-eating commercial society that he has tried to create for himself, and which is shot through with falsity and unfreedom from top to bottom. He makes a great deal of fuss about individual freedom, but one may ask if such freedom really exists. Is there really a genuine freedom for the person, or only the irresponsibility of the atomized individual members of mass society? The presence of the Negro in a state of humiliation and dependence may serve, perhaps, to perpetuate the illusion of power and autonomy which the white loafers on the porch of the village store imagine they enjoy. Actually, their own lives are empty, pointless, absurd, totally lacking in freedom. The departure of the Negroes suddenly makes that truth inescapable. Hence, the frustrated whites confront the meaninglessness of their world. They know no other way of facing such facts than violence. This, then, according to our Negro writers, is the plight of the white American and indeed of the whole Western world. Europe cannot save face by sitting back complacently and viewing with pity the conflicts and confusions of white America. When the house next door is on fire, you too are in danger. America does not stand judgment alone. It is the whole white world, including Russia, that stands accused of centuries of injustice, prejudice, and racism. All white men together, in spite of their fantasies of innocence, are prisoners of the same illusion, seduced by their own slogans, obsessed by the voice of an inner demon. They have no better alternatives than the passivities and oral fantasies of the consumer's dream world and the violent barbarities with which they react when briefly awakened to all that threatens to contradict their infantile dream. In such a situation, it is absurd for the Negro to place any hope either in the white liberal or in the affluent Negro leader. Though there may be, in each of these cases, some awareness of the problem, the awareness is not deep enough to mean anything. On the contrary, it only makes matters worse by bringing a new element of delusion into the minds of those concerned. The liberal and the Negro leader are, each in his own way, completely committed to the comforts and securities, and therefore to the falsities of the status quo. Each, in his own way, has sold out to the establishment, and his defection is all the more vicious because, with his seeming awareness of the problems and his demonstrations of great goodwill, he only encourages the Negro to continue in hapless submission, to wait, and to hope for that same magic solution which continues, as always before, to proceed further into the future. To neither of these, says Kelley, can the Negro profitably or even safely listen. The most pitiful character in the book is perhaps the Southern white liberal who was once a promising young radical writer and crusader in the halcyon days of the 30s, but who allowed himself to be intimidated and silenced in order to protect his family. His life thereafter is doomed to sterility, impotence, uselessness. He may be prosperous and secure, but he is a total failure. He has betrayed his truth and his vocation, and is therefore miserable. This comes close to being a standard formula in the new Negro literature. It calls white society before the bar of history and hands down the judgment that it has lamentably failed. Christianity itself is prominently associated in the failure. Without delaying here to make certain distinctions and to defend the basic truth of Christianity, we must admit that the judgment is not altogether without foundation. The practical conduct of many Christians, of whole groups and entire churches, lends it a great deal of support. Christians have perhaps too often been content to delude themselves with vague slogans and abstract formulas about brotherly love. They have too easily become addicted to token gestures of goodwill and charity, which they have then taken as a total dispensation from all meaningful action and genuine concern in the crucial problems of our time. As a result, they have become unable to listen to the voice of God in the events of the time, and have resisted that voice instead of obeying it. What is the conclusion? The white man is so far gone that he cannot free the Negro because he cannot even free himself. Hence, these books are not in any sense demanding that the whites now finally free the Negroes. On the contrary, the magnificent paradox they utter is that the Negro has a mission to free the white man, and he can begin to do this if he learns to free himself. His first step to freedom must be the clear realization that he cannot depend on the white man or trust him for anything, since the white man is hopelessly impotent, deluded, and stupefied by his own alienation. Such is the message of the Negro to white America, delivered by men who, to my mind, are the most impressive and inspired writers in our country today. Is the message true? I must say that messages like this cannot be clearly declared to be either true or false until time itself lays out all the evidence before us. But that is precisely our difficulty. We cannot wait. We have to decide now, before the truth or falsity of the message becomes evident. We have to be willing to make it evident. The question is then not whether the message is true, but whether it is credible. And to this I can only give the answer of one man's opinion. Comparing the spiritual earnestness of the message, the creative vitality of the messengers, the fruits of the message, with all the fumbling evasions and inanities of those who disbelieve the message, I can come up with no better choice than to listen very seriously to the Negro and what he has to say. I, for one, am absolutely ready to believe that we need him to be free for our sake, even more than for his own. The school children of Birmingham would have convinced me, if I had not been already convinced. I find the message entirely credible. Doubtless, it may not be infallibly true, but I think there is no hope for us unless we are able to take seriously the obvious elements of truth which it contains.